Love Me Fierce in Danger 2. The copies will fly off the shelves. Oh, hi! I was just planning my retirement. Welcome to Ellroy Reads. I'm Stephen Powell. This is the show where every week I look at a book that was very important to James Ellroy in his development as a novelist, as a stylist, as a book that affected him emotionally and philosophically and was just really, really profound to him. This week's choice is To Die in Beverly Hills by Gerald Petievich. Yes, this is a very special novel. So Petievich is a very interesting character. He was born into cop royalty. His father and his brother were both Los Angeles Police Department officers, and Gerald Petievich started his career in the US Army and rose to the ranks as the head of counterespionage based in Germany, and he was based in Nuremberg in 1968 when he received a commendation for his work during the Soviet invasion of Prague. Then in 1970 he joins the Secret Service. For 15 years he is assigned to Presidential Protection Detail and the enforcement of federal counterfeiting laws. And it was during a particularly long stint in Paris that he began reading the greats of genre fiction, particularly Graham Greene and John le Carré, and he began to think that, hey, maybe I can do this myself. So he starts writing, he gets published in the early 1980s, and there's a lovely photograph here of him showing his newly published novel to President Reagan. This is when he's still a Secret Service agent, and Reagan looks delighted. By 85, his career has taken off to the point where he can quit the Secret Service and become a full-time writer. Now, Petievich's most memorable character is a Treasury agent, Charles Carr, who appears in 4 novels, including this one, To Die in Beverly Hills. Now, the plot of this is that Carr is roped into a stakeout with a very disreputable Beverly Hills police detective by the name of Travis Bailey. And Bailey says, I've got some informant information. You're going to want to come to this because it affects a case that you're working on, a big case involving an informant in an organized crime mafia trial. And the use of informants is really particular in all of Petievich's novels, including one of his most famous novels, The Quality of the Informant. And Carr smells a rat, but he goes along anyway, and sure enough, his partner is very, very seriously wounded in a shootout that happens at the incident. And Carr begins to suspect Bailey. He thinks that Bailey was behind this the entire time, and he becomes convinced that he's got to take him down. So what happens is a cop versus cop narrative, and it's really a case of inverted detection because there's no mystery surrounding who the villain is. We know that from the start. It becomes a case of how is he going to be taken down? How will he be caught? Will he be caught or killed? How many people will he take down with him? And Travis Bailey is a very attractive villain, if that's the right term for it. He's very sleazy, and he's also, the reason Carr suspects him is because he's everything a police detective shouldn't be. He's obsessed with his own reputation, with his own fame, with his own advancement, and the accruing, just the particularly kind of plastic celebrity wealth that you might say is typical of Beverly Hills. He runs a burglary ring where he uses the work of a hypnotist who is one of is actually a con man. He's a guy that Charles Carr put in prison, and you meet the hypnotist, you meet the fence, you meet the burglars, you meet all of these kind of really sleazy LA characters who are in on the burglary ring, or in on the crime, and they're all just completely with not a good word to be said about them. In fact, one of the funniest characters in this is Delcy, who is Travis Bailey's girlfriend, his ditzy girlfriend, who he is helping advance through the police. She's a policewoman, and he's getting her promotions, which she really doesn't deserve. There's one bit where she's looking at one of her photo spreads. It's a kind of nude police photo spread called Officers of the Raw. And that's the sort of dark humor that Ellroy really admires in Petievich and in this novel in particular, which he has singled out as a favorite, but he actually likes all of Petievich's novels. And the novel, I have to say, is probably the most flat out pleasurable read of all the books I've covered so far in this series, because when we're from Carl's perspective, he's a great hero. He's complex in that he's got this long-suffering girlfriend who really wants him to settle down for them to be the kind of 2.4 children family, but he says that's incompatible with his work, and she's kind of like, she can't say goodbye to him because she's in love with him, and he's in love with her, but he can't commit to her. But as a law enforcement officer, he's very, very dogged and intuitive and shrewd in how he traps Bailey, who is a worthy adversary, because Bailey, being a detective himself, knows all of the tricks, knows all of the police methods, won't talk on the phone, is always distancing himself from the crime. He's got buffers. He makes sure that there's nothing that ties him to the crime, and when there is, he will get rid of them. He's not afraid to murder. He's fallen so far from grace. And there's one brilliant scene where it's almost Hitchcockian in that, if you know, particularly Hitchcock's later films like Psycho or Frenzy, where you put in the villain's perspective for a little bit and you don't root for them, but as you're feeling the pressure come on the villain, you feel the sweat on their brow, and you feel them starting to panic as they're running out of options. So Bailey ends up murdering a female witness who could incriminate him and shoves her in the trunk of his car. And when he opens the boot to get rid of her body, he doesn't realize that her sleeve has become tied to the latch in the boot. So when he opens it, she goes like this, and he jumps out of his skin because he thinks she's risen from the dead. And it is full of great scenes like that. And I think one of the benefits of this is that because Petievich's career was quite different. You know, he was in the army and he's in the Secret Service. It's very different from a lot of law enforcement work that usually gets covered in genre fiction. You know, how many LAPD novels have there been? How many FBI or even Sheriff's Department characters have you seen? We know what these guys do, those other guys do. We don't know so much about kind of Petievich's background, so it brings a lot of surprises as to how these guys operate. So he adds a realism to it, and it's also one of the great Los Angeles novels, because this guy knows Los Angeles, and yeah, he knows the sleaze, he knows the underbelly, he knows how celebrity kind of corrupts everything. He knows the kind of, you know, the stench of you know, just of sordid details just here, there, and everywhere. No matter how wealthy you are, or you in terms of character, you're probably not that different from, you know, the street detritus and all of that. So you can see how Ellroy would really, really admire this work. It's interesting that one of the films Ellroy admires is one of very few films that was made about Treasury agents, and that's T-Men by Anthony Mann. That was made in 1947. It's one of the great film noirs. It's shot in a documentary style. So works on Treasury agents are few and far between. Petievich has had some luck in Hollywood, in that his novels To Live and Die in LA was filmed quite famously by William Friedkin, and another novel, The Sentinel, was also filmed in the last few years with Michael Douglas. I think one of the reasons Petievich isn't that well known is, although he started quite prolifically in the 90s, he really began to slow down, and his last novel was The Sentinel, which was published in the early noughties, although I hope he's still got a couple of it in him, because I'd really be interested to read him. So how it came about, the connection between Petievich and Ellroy, how I stumbled on it, is when I was writing Love Me First in Danger, the Edgar-winning biography of James Ellroy, and the Edgar's just right there, by the way. I was rereading LA Confidential, and I said to Ellroy, hey, I noticed in LA Confidential you use a lot of names of your friends and associates. There's Sobel, there's Penzler. There's Vax, there's a character called Vax, and I'd interviewed Andrew Vax, the novelist. There's a character called Callum, and I'd interviewed Jonathan Callum, the novelist. They were all friends of Ellroy. And there's a character called Petievich, which, by the way, is a Serbian-American name, which is what Gerald Petievich is. And I said, did you know Gerald Petievich? And he's like, oh, yeah, I knew Jerry. We were really good friends. How their friendship started is James B. Harris, the film director, adapted Petievich's novel Money Men as the movie Boiling Point, which starred Dennis Hopper, Wesley Snipes, and Lolita Davidovich. And James B. Harris had also adapted, he did the first screen adaptation of a James Ellroy novel. He adapted the film Blood on the Moon, and he directed it as the 1988 film Cop, starring James Woods. So Ellroy got to know Gerald Petievich through James B. Harris, and so it was Harris, Petievich, Ellroy. That was the circle for a few years, and he's like, "Oh, you've got to interview Jerry Petievich." He's just like, "But I tell you, I haven't spoken to him in 30 years." And I said, oh, "Okay," and that kind of set off alarm bells for me because I've been interviewing a lot of people who'd been cut off by Ellroy abruptly, and had some bad feelings about that. And sometimes I could make a good interview, or it could make a bad interview. It could make a good interview if they were just happy to sound off about him, or if they were happy to say, see the complexity of the man, see the little boy lost, or everything, or the abandonment syndrome, or something like that. So I set about trying to land an interview with Jerry Petievich for the biography, and then sure enough, Ellroy was doing a lot of Zoom appearances at the time because it was the height of COVID, and he couldn't tour his book Widespread Panic. So he was doing these YouTube appearances, and I was watching them, and I noticed that the minute we'd had that conversation, he started talking about Gerald Petievich during these appearances and how he really admired his work, particularly this one. And it almost felt like he was trying to get a message out to him that after 30 years, I still consider you a friend. And it was kind of like Sote Voce, would you talk to my biographer? And I remember thinking, why do people do that? I'm very, very direct as a person, and it probably makes me such a lousy flirt, but I thought it was slightly odd behavior. Anyway, so I reached out to Petievich's agent, and it turns out she was a huge Ellroy fan, and she thought it'd be brilliant if Petievich would talk to me about Ellroy. So I thought, oh, this is a good sign. And then I got back from her a very sheepish message the next day saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was told in no uncertain terms that he's not going to talk to you about James Ellroy," which was a shame. And who knows, maybe one day we might have a kind of so we might know a bit more about their friendship other than what James has told me. But James Ellroy was always very, very admiring of Gerald Petievich, both as an author and a man. And I must say that of all the books we've covered so far on this show, To Die in Beverly Hills is just the most flat-out pleasurable in terms of structure, character, plot, style, and milieu. It is, it's nice and short. I got through it in 2 days, and it's an absolutely brilliant novel. And I think it's one of the great LA crime novels, what frankly underrated LA crime novels. And I think you should definitely check it out. Okay, thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time for another episode of ELLROY Reads. Bye bye.